Well, thanks, Zimbabwe and Leanne. And let's get back to our discussion on this Youth Day edition of Morning Live. Now, we are in discussion about the conference that took place, the SAIIA conference, where 150 young people were invited, looking at, the future of young people and also policy making and where their views are at this stage. Dimpo Legeo was a community manager at Youth Lab, and YT Consulting Africa co-founder Kenneth Diole are our guests. Dimpo and Kenneth, thanks for staying with us. We'll let you go shortly. But Dimpo, I just wanted to know from you as well, just in terms of, the sort of discussions that were had and the missing voices for young people. If you will just weigh in on that, please.
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think when we talk about youth participation in decision and policy-making processes, the most important thing is that you have diverse youth who are present, who can bring a diverse experiences, which Kenneth spoke to. So in this process, you had young people of all ages. I think this is the most diverse range that I have ever worked with. So young people who are in varsity, young people who are in high school, young people who are working, young people who are unemployed, young people who represent youth in the youth development space or represent youth formations who are interested in, varied youth development areas. So for instance, at Youth Lab, we work very much with youth policy making, youth participation in decision-making processes. But in my group, I had young people who are interested in issues such as gender-based violence, young people who worked with the South African Institute of International Affairs. So the focus areas or our backgrounds were incredibly diverse. And another really important thing about this process is that young people had the opportunity to own it from the get-go. So we set the agenda. We decided what the 9 focus points are going to be. We decided how we're going to conduct the research and how we want to bring forward those recommendations. So I think this is definitely a process, or one of the only processes I've been a part of, where young people were really meaningfully engaged.
So we have to wrap it. So going forward, just in terms of the key focus areas for both of you in terms of governance and how this could actually propel government to actually take care of the youth and make sure we really bring down significantly that 75% unemployment rate amongst young people. What were some of the focus areas that I would say you can take a few and then you the other few, Kenneth, but let me start with you, Dimpo.
Okay, so my group looked at youth political participation, and we looked at the extent that the South African political landscape allows young people to take part in it as a constituency, but also in leadership. And what we realized is that youth representation in parliament only kind of began to rise after fees must fall, where we saw a lot of people that emerged during those protests become members of parliament or take up leadership positions in some of the big political parties. And so you have to ask yourself, what happens to young people who don't make it into a higher learning institution, who don't make it onto a campus? How then are they able to participate politically? We also looked at youth political participation in terms of elections and the declining youth vote, why young people are choosing to opt out of the system. And it's basically because young people feel like the current electoral system does not serve them, and it doesn't allow them to really hold leadership accountable, this multi-party system that we currently have. In terms of a way forward, I think the most important thing that came out, there are recommendations throughout all 9 of these topics, but the most important thing is that young people have to be included at the table when decisions are being made. You cannot continue to make decisions on behalf of young people without them being present. And when you are bringing young people to the table, it's important to not do it in a tokenistic manner where you're just ticking boxes for numbers. You have to include young people who represent young people in all their diversity, because youth are not a homogenous group. You need young people who represent youth with disabilities, youth who are unemployed, youth in the LGBT community, young people across the spectrum. So we cannot continue to make policies that are supposed to serve young people without having the voices of young people present.
And your final word to us, Kenneth?
Yeah, so I think for me, there's maybe 4 or 5 things that I want us to take away with. The first is that inclusion is paramount. And by inclusion in this case, one of the key learning areas that we saw was that how do we greatly bring in people who are not within the urban centers, so the peri-urban and the rural areas, because access has proven to be a privilege, as we have seen, as everything has moved to the digital space. So number 2, we need to bridge the gaps of access. So whether it's data provision, digital device, and literacy campaigns to ensure that more and more young people, but even more broadly South Africans, have access to different platforms, to access to information, and to be able to participate in similar like structures. Number 3 is, I think, from an economic perspective, is that we have to look more broadly at other factors that are influencing unemployment, right? The cost of seeking for a job for most young people who don't come from a privileged background can be in excess of 600 Rand a month. And then on the other side, they're only getting 350 Rand a month, means that there's a huge gap there that must be looked at, right? So factors influencing unemployment, more specifically the NEET category, those between 15 and 24 who are neither employed, not in any form of education or training institution. That category has gone up to 34.1% as per the last quarter, right? And I think lastly is really around creating synergy across the different areas, right? The youth conversation is not a conversation in and of itself. It just finds its worst manifestation as and when it relates to young people, right? So youth unemployment does not happen on its own. We have to factor in the implications of government, of corruption, of lack of inclusion of young people. We have to factor in many other elements that affect young people where they currently are, and how do we make sure that we consistently make them part and parcel of the process, and not only during periods like June, which is Youth Month, because the issues of young people are not confined to only June. They are year-round, and almost every quarter for the past 15 months has seen an increase in terms of year-on-year youth unemployment. And so this is a catastrophe that is waiting to happen if we do not address it with the urgency it requires. Thank you.
Absolutely correct, and a pertinent point on which to leave it. Thank you so much to both of you. Those were Community Manager at Youth Lab, Dimpo Lecheo, and YT Consulting Africa co-founder and member of SAIIA's National Council, Kenneth Diole, discussing governance and policy failures, and also the impact that this had on youth development and the future of South Africa.